welcome to this seminar on leading partnerships. My name is Jen Charteris. I'm a pastor's wife in the north of England. I'm speaking to you from Newcastle upon Tyne. My day job nowadays is leading an organisation called Crosslands. We provide in-context theological education for people who would never be able to go away to full-time seminary. In my previous life and the background to leading this seminar, I worked in management consulting for well over 25 years, and a great deal of that was working with leaders who were responsible for the leadership, the creation and the leadership and management of quite complex partnership arrangements in government, in the private sector, and elsewhere, and also had the opportunity to work with a number of ministry organizations with partnerships taking place in pursuit of particular ministry goals. Many years ago, when in the earlier days of becoming involved in helping leaders with their partnerships, one of my clients said to me, "I just wish somebody could tell me what good looks like." And so colleagues and I, who'd worked on many projects, went away and did quite a significant piece of work looking at the literature, but reviewing all the partnerships we'd worked on, what had gone right, what had gone wrong, and so on. And we pulled that together in a fairly simple model. And that model is something I'm going to spend probably the biggest chunk of today talking you through. But just before we get into the heart of that, there are a few other things that we'll aim to cover. Hopefully you can see the slide coming up on the screen there. Just thinking about why we partner or whether to partner is actually a good starting point. We often take for granted that, we've set off on this partnership, or, somebody said partnering would be a good way to do this. But pausing and thinking whether or not partnering is the right strategy at any given point in time. And then we're going to start to delve into what it takes to make it work. And there are a few dimensions of that. First of all, it's as our own entity, as our own ministry or organization, we need to be in good shape ourselves if we're going to be a good partner to another organization. There's also a whole lot of work that we need to do in preparation for entering into a partnership, the kind of alignment work, the testing, the fit, the setting things up well that needs to be done as we prepare to partner. And then we're going to take a look at what healthy partnership looks like over a period of time, some of the things that can go wrong if they're not looked after well, some of the areas where stresses and strains will come up and that need to be attended to. That's probably what I'm going to spend the most time on. And then if we have time towards the end, I might touch a little bit on the leadership qualities. There are some specific leadership qualities or specific manifestations of some leadership qualities that have proved to be very important in the leading of partnerships. So let me jump in on the question of should we partner, or to misquote a very well-known English playwright, to partner or not to partner is a very good question. And this is one of the sort of biggest sort of strategic questions that most organizations will face at some point. We want to do something we're not currently doing, or do something in a way that we're not currently doing it. And there are three basic options. Now this is boiling strategy down to a sort of ridiculously oversimplified level, but go with me for a moment. Three basic options we have are to make it, buy it, or partner for it. So by making it, this is the idea that we build that capacity ourselves. We hire the people, we set up the infrastructure and the systems, and we do it all ourselves. And if the opportunity is big enough and clear enough, and your resources are strong enough, then that can be in many ways a much simpler option than partnering for it. The alternative, of course, is you buy it in, and so you contract for some other organization or entity to do it. And in a commercial organization, that can be a fairly transactional thing. But then the third option is the potential of partnering to do something. But bear in mind that partnering is just inherently more challenging. Why do I say that? I say that because you're taking at least two organizations, and sometimes it's multiple organizations, which all have their own governance structures, their own goals, their own drivers, their own values, and you're seeking to achieve one thing together from all of those different systems. When it works, it's brilliant, but it is very challenging. And so the bottom line is there needs to be a really, really compelling case for why we would go about setting up a partnership. And so the core question for you, if you're contemplating going into some sort of a partnership, is there a really strong case that we can make as to why we'll do it better by going down this route than if we were to do it ourselves? The answer in many cases is yes. That's why we end up in partnerships. But in my experience, too many partnerships are sort of founded on an enthusiastic conversation between two people who know each other well, or perhaps met at a conference or whatever it might be. But the real compelling case is often not made. Let me move on to thinking about that in a little bit more detail from the perspective of are we in good shape as an organization, as a ministry or entity, to be a good partner to others? Doing this kind of strategic thinking ourselves before we're at the table with potential partners is very, very important. Here are three areas that you may find useful to stop and think about. And perhaps you might be the organization that's been approached by another one for partnering. Is there a really strong fit with vision, mission, and strategy? So do we have a really clearly defined reason for doing that? And is that consistent with our overall objectives and goals? And have we really considered other ways that we could achieve our goal, or the alternative ways to achieve this? I was on a call and in a meeting today where there had been a sort of very enthusiastic conversation some time ago between two people who thought a partnership would be great. Now, when we started to sort of hammer out what each party really wanted to achieve, the recognition that we could achieve something that was inherently complementary, but where we weren't tied together in a formal partnership, was likely to be a much more productive way to go about it. And one of the reasons for that was because the theological tightness between us was just not strong enough to really drive the closeness that it would take to make a partnership worthwhile. And somebody's actually raised a question here. I see a question from somebody who asks how much theological compatibility is necessary for a partnership. And what tools or process might you use to determine, to help evaluate the theological compatibility? In my view, theological compatibility is really, really important. I think it does, there may be some ability to partner with a sort of less tight theological compatibility if that's not fundamental to the activity that you're doing. But in my experience, the closer alignment there is theologically, the more likely you are to be able to partner really well. Tools and process you use, well, in the UK, we tend to just be a bit tribal about that, which is not necessarily the right way to go about it. But what tools and process, I mean, certainly laying out and really working through the sort of fundamental theological distinctions of each organization and where the pressures on that might be, would be a very good way to go about that. And perhaps envisaging some scenarios that might come up if this partnership went ahead, and just exploring how the different theological positions might play out in relation to that could be another way to do that. So I've gone off on a bit of a sidebar for a question there, but all of this is related to the decision to partner at all. And another question is just an internal assessment. So, you know, how important is this to us? Do the key decision makers support the proposed partnerships? What are our strengths and weaknesses? That's a really important question. the more the more clear we each are on what our strengths and weaknesses are when we come around the table to explore a partnership, the better we're likely to find a good fit. Doesn't mean we need to have the same strengths, but we need to understand where the potential weaknesses are, not oversell ourselves at that partnership table. We need to be really clear about what we bring to the relationship and what we need for our partners. So those are some of the things you might think about in terms of the internal partnership and the decision to explore a partnership. Having broached the possibility of a partnership, then there's a whole lot of in-depth assessment that we need to do together. And here are some of the areas that you might find useful to look at. Perhaps the question of theological compatibility particularly comes in here. So number one, assessing the opportunity. So I raised this question earlier, but it's fundamental. What is it that we can achieve together that we could not achieve separately, and is that compelling? And the kind of realism test. So is there a genuinely realistic chance of achieving outcomes or benefits that will justify the efforts and costs? One of the reasons I raise this is because certainly in the commercial world, the majority of partnerships fail to achieve the extent of the benefits that they set out to achieve. Mergers often fail to achieve the value that they're supposed to achieve. And so you've got to be really, really careful to bring that realism to say, is there a realistic chance of achieving what we're setting out to achieve? Testing the real appetite. So where does this partnership fit for our respective organizations is a really good question to ask. You know, if for my organization, this is a really, really big deal, but for the other organization, this is just kind of down there, then we may really struggle. This is not about the relative size of the two partner organizations. It's about where it fits into their priorities. So there might be a much bigger organization than me, but where this is a really important strategic thing that they want to achieve with this partnership, in which case there's more likely to be a kind of balance of appetite and leadership, time and energy and commitment to the partnership. And then being unashamed about assessing each other. I haven't seen this done well in the Christian world, I have to say really honestly, but it's become an extraordinarily in-depth thing in the commercial world. So work that is done on values alignment, exploring culture fit and capability, performance, honesty about strengths and weaknesses, testing the credibility and competence and chemistry with key people who are going to play key roles in the partnership. Absolutely vital thing. And so as we move towards that, we then move towards the creation of the formal framework and having that defined in writing, a memorandum of understanding, whatever the document is, making sure that there is a documentation of what our goals are, what the structure is going to be, what the commercial arrangements are going to be, sort of setting out really clear expectations for one another. We'll come on to that in a little bit more depth as we look at the next stage. And then there's a question of an exit route, and there are several people in the world of strategic partnership who would advise you never ever to go into a partnership where you don't have some idea of what the exit route is. I'm not quite so hard over that, but I broadly agree that having some sense of how this might play out and what a good exit might look like in time is a very wise thing to do. One of the questions that came in prior to the seminar is, should we set a duration for our partnership so that we can then decide whether to review our agreement or not? I think that's a really, really wise thing potentially to do. The risk that partnerships kind of drift on forever, but having really lost their purpose and lost the edge and the real clarity of vision with which they started out, and perhaps having lost a lot of the key people who were closely aligned with one another, is such a danger and such a waste of time and energy. Whereas if, if we agree that this is, we're going to do this for 5 years, and as we get to the 4-year point, we're going to revisit and decide, what shape the relationship might take from this, then there's likely to be a much more wholesome review of how well this is working, whether the focus is still right, whether the fit is still right, and so on. There was also a question raised, which I'll pick up now, which says, because this is in the preparation to partner piece, how do you approach other organizations who are more established than you? The starting point for that is to be really clear about what you can do better than they can. And that's not about being arrogant. That's just about confidence in the fact that, no organization can be good at everything, and to understand your niche really well. Now, a lot of very mature organizations regard partnerships with smaller organizations very, very positively, because very often what a smaller or less established organization will bring is a whole lot of freshness, innovation, agility, the ability to kind of see things in different ways, perhaps a lot more risk appetite, so they're willing to try things that would be harder to do in the more established organization. So don't underestimate the value and power that you may have, the usefulness that you may have to bring to a partnership if you are the less established organizations. Practicalities of how you approach it, it does probably need to start relationally, but ask around, because very often there's the opportunity to sort of get introduced by somebody who knows both organizations. But make sure you've got a really compelling pitch. What is the vision for what you want to achieve? Why do you want to partner with them? What do you bring to the table, and what are you looking for from them? As we move into this next section, you might well want to have open somewhere you can write, either pen and paper, or a bit of your desktop on your screen if you want to do that. The model I'm going to take you through is actually provided for you in the downloadable document in the conference app, but so you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to take notes on the model itself. But what you might like to do is to use this as an opportunity to assess some partnership you currently have or are approaching and getting into. So you're very welcome to treat this as a bit of a live case study that you can work on right now. Otherwise, just listen, take it in, and you can then go back, find the model, and apply it when you have a bit more leisure. So we're reinventing the wheel here right now. What I'm going to do is take you through each component of this wheel, and this was what emerged when I told the story earlier of the client who said, can somebody just tell me what good looks like? And when we pulled together all the research, all the insight from our other clients and so on, these were the factors that emerged, and I'm going to walk you through each one step by step. Right at the heart of this, and it's not an accident that this is the hub of the wheel, if you like, is the need to have aligned values and mutual goals. So having real clarity about what we're trying to achieve, the sense that we stand for the same things, not necessarily exactly the same values, but certainly aligned values. And in a Christian ministry context, this is where the closeness of theological fit, sufficiently close theological fit, probably makes, really counts for a great deal. And as you get into the partnership, often you sort of start off with great intentions and superficially really strong aligned values and mutual goals and so on. But as you get into the partnership, you've got to keep coming back to these. You've got to keep restating them. You've got to keep testing them and revisiting to make sure that everybody is still tight around those values. As more people come into the partnership and get involved in it, you've got to make sure that these are being restated all the time. And so a key role of leaders is to keep holding this tight hub that is the thing that holds the whole partnership together. So in your current partnership, or some partnership that you may find yourself involved in, how are you doing? Does there need to be work on getting back to what the core goals are, and just testing for values alignment? Is there a conversation that needs to happen at the leadership level to redefine and refine those? Is there a communication piece that perhaps needs to happen that helps everybody who's involved to get connected back with the values and goals that lie at the heart of the partnership? So many partnerships go off beam when those become fuzzy, when people lose sight of them. So that's the first area. Make a note if that's something that resonates for you in your own particular partnership context. And then let's look at the rim of the wheel. So this is the bit that kind of gives it strength and stability. And these are the formal agreements that we have. And really important to those agreements is the idea that we've talked a little bit about how we're going to share what I would call pain and gain. So in a commercial context, it's how we share risk and reward. But in a ministry context, perhaps it's more about the sort of pain and gain. Who's contributing what? Who's taking what? Who's responsible for making the contributions, and who's going to benefit from them? And are we all okay with that? Does that feel like it's healthy and fair? And if it's not in balance, are we happy with that? Are we really happy with that? Because sometime down the road, the likelihood is that when this whole partnership gets stress tested, those are the sorts of things that will come out where kind of we were okay with that at the start, but perhaps we're not so okay with that at the moment. And so doing work on how we're going to share the pain, how we're going to share the gain and the outputs from all of this, who's going to benefit and how, but having that well captured in agreements is a very, very wise step. And again, take a moment to think, in terms of any partnership that you with, are there agreements that need revisiting? Were the agreements strong enough in the first place? What are the areas where perhaps it feels out of balance? And is there something that you need to open up and work on to bring that back into alignment and balance? So that's the rim of the wheel. Let me take you then through some of the spokes of the wheel. Those two are absolutely non-negotiable. I think all the other components are important, but in my experience, one or two of these might be a little wobbly, and you'll still be able to kind of go. So the wheel metaphor still holds, but over time you want to just be paying attention to the health and appropriateness of each of these areas. So let's think about leadership now. This is where it's really difficult that we're not all in the same room. What structure of leadership, how much there is actually a joint leadership team, for instance, or just two separate leadership teams that align, depends entirely on the kind of partnership, the length of it, the scale of it, and the purpose of it. But nonetheless, having leaders who are aligned, who have agreed ways of leading the organization or the partnership is a very, very vital thing. In many of the partnerships I've worked with, creating a joint leadership has been an important step, but that's usually on a bigger partnership, and sometimes it can just be agreeing what are the key kind of leadership points that you're going to work on together. And there are some aspects of decision making and so on, which I'll come to in a moment. Closely linked to that, there's the question of structure and roles. So in what ways, who's doing what, and when you've got more than one organization, 2 or 3 organizations, perhaps one joint venture I worked on, it was an 8-party joint venture, the need to have real clarity about who's doing what, and preferably not to have people doing the same thing on both sides of the equation. So when a partnership becomes mature, you will work towards a situation where you deduplicate many of the roles. And so instead of having the same function on both sides, you might actually have a single person doing that on behalf of both parties. But that's not a hard and fast rule. That depends, as I say, on the scale of it, the length of it, and the complexity of it. But people knowing exactly, you know, who we should speak to across the two or more organisations, absolutely vital thing, and yet often is not got right. So, for example, you know, you may have two senior leaders who are very committed to the partnership, but actually there's never been the kind of joining up across the two organisation structures. And so the more you can introduce people to and connect people to the relevant people in the other entity, the more collaboration you are likely to get. So it's a kind of many-to-many set of relationships that you want to be aiming for in general in a partnership. Thinking about how we communicate, is there scope for joint communication? So can, you know, are we giving the same messages both to the wider world but also to our internal teams? There's a huge area of work that can be done on that. Again, hugely dependent on the complexity, but are the staff of both entities getting the same messages really consistently? Having leaders actually address and engage with the staff of the other entity can be a really powerful thing. What are the communication protocols that we use? You know, how will information be passed between them? How are we going to raise things that need to be addressed? I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. And then related to that, the question of decision making. So what are the big decisions that are going to need to be made, and who gets to make them? So some decisions are sort of easily made by one or other of the respective parties, and we can define those quite clearly. But there are some decisions that you specifically want to reserve to be made jointly. And then there's a question of, well, what is the forum and what is the group or the structure that gets to make those? So many entities will create some sort of a partnership board or a partnership steering group who will come together and make those joint decisions. And that can be a really powerful thing to be as explicit as possible. So, you know, in your partnerships, how is the decision making going? Is there clarity? Does there need to be a conversation about where decisions are made and which decisions need to be made perhaps more jointly, or where we need to just trust each other to make decisions back in our separate patches for the sake of efficiency and so on. Over centralizing the decisions in some joint body can actually slow things down. So just be careful of that. But nonetheless, it's very important that some of those decisions are centrally made. Let's carry on. So there's a whole section around planning. So, you know, making sure that you are setting aside time for jointly planning where this is going. And actually linked to that, now I thought we were going to go on to improvement next. I should have done improvement next. With planning goes also reviewing and improving how we are doing things. So setting aside days when key groups of people come together and spend time really looking ahead at where this partnership is going is vital. I've got the wrong label on there, I've just noticed, but this should say systems and protocols. So are we going to have joint systems of any kind? For example, what tools are we going to use? Are we all going to be on Microsoft Teams, or are we going to be on Google or something? Other platforms are available. Are we going to use Asana or Trello or whatever? And how is information getting, you know, how are we going to deal with things like GDPR and passing of information between them? So, and the extent to which we need to align our systems and have, you know, perhaps common and shared systems will depend again on the scale and complexity of the partnership that you have. But it's an important area. You know, very often a kind of complete mismatch of systems and protocols will cause a great deal of unnecessary tension in a partnership. one of the biggest partnerships I ever worked on in the defence and aerospace sector. One of the most enormous sources of tension was differences in the financial reporting cycles of the two organisations, and that's not a thing that's easily resolved. But it caused a great deal of misunderstanding, mistrust, and so on. And we eventually found a workaround that helped them to sort of line that up better, and the relationships all improved as a result of that. But there are hard wiring aspects that will make the work more efficient or less efficient. So how are your systems and protocols doing? And then I do apologize. I've ended up with some wrong labels on here. Huge apologies. But this label should say conflict resolution. And what's really important about this is that it's on the model. In other words, the assumption here is that conflict will happen. And the most effective partnership leadership of partnerships I've seen were not the ones that were absent of conflict, because usually that means that issues are not being addressed fully, but actually those where the leaders were skillful at surfacing areas of conflict differences and being able to deal with them really well. And having the expectation that those differences and those conflicts will be brought to the surface and worked through really quickly makes a profound difference. There was a very large construction project in the UK, which achieved phenomenal results in terms of how it met its time and cost and quality deadlines. But one of the key things was that they had a rule that said, if you have a problem in your bit of the construction project and you raise the problem by 5 p.m. that day, then the solution to it will be paid for out of the common budget. If you hide the problem and it comes out later, then you will have to pay for it from your company's budget. And this was a very big, complex joint venture. And it was phenomenal, the rate at which problems got raised and solved, because there was a profound commitment to doing that. So conflict resolution is a really important thing to learn to do well if you're going to work in partnerships. Another wrong label, I apologize, and that is improvement. So commitment to coming together to say, how could we do this better? Even if we're doing it brilliantly, how could we make this even better? Collecting data that shows how we perform and agreeing what that data will be and how we're going to use it to drive improvement, very, very important. I'm really conscious of time. Let me get towards the end of this. Of course, the component I haven't covered here is the tyre, the bit that helps us get over the bumps, and that is about the relationships and the trust. And I've included here for you, this is one of my favorite little pieces called the trust equation. It's developed by somebody called Charles Green. You can go and look it up. But it goes, trust is a quotient. It's credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, but that's divided by the degree of self-orientation. In other words, the more I go after my own interests at the expense of yours, the less the trust is going to be, because that everything's divided by that. And this if you've got difficulties with trust in a particular partnership situation, this can often be a very useful way to shine a light on why that is. You can break down the components and think, is there more that we could do? Is our credibility not strong enough? Have we not put the right people forward? Is our reliability not good enough? Do we do what we say we're going to do? And by intimacy, we mean knowing the other organization really well. Do we understand what makes them tick? Do we understand what they really care about? When we're not together with them, are we able to predict what they will care about and act accordingly? Or do we come across as if we're in this for ourselves and not for them? So that's a great little device for exploring that whole area of relationship and trust. The thing about the tire is you can get punctures in it, which can be repaired. I mean, the puncture will always show, but they can be repaired, and the pressure in the tire can go up and down over time. But that's the bit that helps to get you over the bumps in the road. And so paying real attention to the health of the relationships and levels of trust in the partnerships, an absolutely vital thing. There's one thing that some of you may think is missing and isn't there, and that's the question of culture. Where does culture come into this? Well, I think I want to suggest that a kind of healthy shared culture is not a thing you do, but it's something you get as a result of the way you do all of these other things, which is not to say, it's not to say you shouldn't be intentional about what sort of culture you want to create, but you don't just do culture. You do all of these other things in a particular way, and as a result of that, a culture emerges. But pay close attention to the culture. I'm going to skip, this is just very briefly to sort of suggest you can make up your own kind of evaluation tools for thinking about the health of a partnership, and sometimes that's a wise thing to do. But I'd encourage you to sort of develop your own model. Just going back to that partnering wheel, you know, some of that will be more relevant to you than other aspects of it. Feel free to take it, adapt it, make your own version of it that might work. But having some framework of this kind, whether it's this one or another one, would be a really good way to generate a conversation between two or more partner organizations that explores how are we doing, what shape are we in. So very often when I've been asked to get involved in mediation between two organizations whose partnership and relationship is struggling, we've just started with a canter through this model, and I just get people, as I invited you to do, just get people to sort of sit there and make notes about these elements as we go through it, and then say, okay, what stands out to you? So, you know, as you've thought about that, what are the top 2 or 3 things that are perhaps of most value or most importance or significance to the health of our partnership right now? And it might not be anything that's broken even, it might be something that's kind of okay, but given where we're heading needs to be much stronger. So what a model like this does is just gives you a kind of neutral language and framework for being able to talk about the issues that need addressing. And part of leadership is not necessarily being the person who can solve all the issues, but the person who can bring the issues to light in a way that feels productive and safe enough to talk about them.